By January 1943, things weren't looking very good for the Germans at Stalingrad. They were freezing, starving, and were being methodically demolished by their enemies. The Soviet trap late in November of 1942 had proved effective, pushing through the Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian armies defending the flanks. The attack in fact proved so effective that by the 31st, German Field Marshal Paulus surrendered the 6th Army inside Stalingrad, with the battle coming to an end on February 2nd, although it would take until March of that year before all remaining resistance was eventually snuffed down. The Soviets, in spite of gaining the overall victory, lost 750,000 men, whilst the Germans lost about 400,000. 20 German divisions had been decimated inside the Stalingrad bubble, with 6 more divisions outside of said bubble being lost to the wrath of their enemies. In the end, Stalingrad proved to not just be the bloodiest battle of the war, but of all time. With the Germans being squeezed out of North Africa, it was time for the Western Allies to make their next move. The British plan was to land in Sicily and push up north. The Americans were initially hesitant to the plan, but eventually caved in. Operation Husky was put into practice on the 9th of July 1943, in which men from the American 82nd and British 1st Airborne Divisions parachuted behind enemy lines and caused panic amongst the Axis forces. It's worth noting that at this point in time the Axis believed, due to deception tactics, that the Allies were far more likely to land somewhere in Sardinia or Greece. This assumption was further bolstered by the fact that on the night the weather was far from optimal for invasion. Whilst these factors certainly proved helpful for Operation Husky, it should be mentioned that the terrible nature of the weather made it very difficult for the troops to actually execute their job. Many of the paratroops were either scattered or cast into the sea. The next day, British and American forces landed on the east and west of southern Sicily. They pushed up the island at a rapid pace, but the Brits were held up at Catania by the defending Italian 6th Army. Seeing an opportunity, the US 7th Army, who had already captured Palermo on July 23rd, launched an offensive west, pushing past the defences on the northern coastline, and by the 5th, the British forces finally took Catania and began to advance on Messina. Seeing the incoming Anglo-American force, the Axis began a retreat. Thus, from the 11th to the 17th of August, over 100,000 Axis soldiers were evacuated from Sicily and taken to the Italian mainland. Having been defeated at Stalingrad, the Germans planned to make another push against the Soviets. Their plan was to retake Kursk, as the German defences there were the weakest. Yet Hitler was nervous, and over the course of several delays the assault was postponed from spring to July. On the 5th of July the Germans attacked Kursk in a pincer maneuver, but the Soviets were ready for them, as they had had time in the midst of Hitler's delays to build trenches and lay down minefields. Many of the German tanks were destroyed by mines and Soviet anti-tank guns, and while the German Tiger tank outmatched the Russian T-34, the Russians had something the Germans didn't: overwhelming force. The Russians continued to build more of their lighter T-34 tanks, and on the 12th of July a huge battle occurred near Pokrovka. It should be mentioned that while the battle was large and devastating, it was often used as a propaganda piece. As a result, the numbers and specifics of the encounter are often disputed. In fact, the Germans didn't encounter as many casualties as the Soviets, yet their enemy's force was too great. In the end, Hitler called off the operation on the 17th, diverting many tanks to the defense of Sicily. As the Allies began to bomb Rome, and with the fall of Sicily, Italian morale was incredibly low. This persuaded the people of Italy to perform a coup d'etat. On the 24th of July, the fascist Grand Council restored military power in Italy to the king, Victor Emmanuel, voting Mussolini out and placing him under arrest. Following this, Italy began secret peace talks with the Allies. On the 3rd of September, the British crossed from Messina into mainland Italy and slowly began to move north, which coincided with the new Italian government signing armistice with the Allies, which was not made public until the 8th. Not long after, more British troops landed at Taranto, whilst American troops did the same at Salerno. Following this, German forces rapidly disarmed the Italian military and took control. The new German reinforcements defended well against the new Allied landings, so much so that Allied reinforcements had to be called in to ensure the safety of the operation. In spite of the initial success of the new defences, it was becoming clear to the Germans that the Allied assault could not be quelled for long. So, on the 15th of September, the Germans fled to positions further northwards, with British forces linking up with the American force at Salerno 5 days later. The 1st of October brought positive results, as an Allied force took Naples, More good news was to come on the 13th, as Italy declared war on Germany. Unfortunately, Mussolini had at this point been rescued and was ruling the German puppet state of the Italian Socialist Republic in the north. The Allies continued to trudge up north. However, their progress was impeded by terrain that significantly favored those defending. By December, the Germans had fallen back to a position called the Gustav Line, which remained fully unbroken until 1944.